The Force binds all things across the galaxy, connecting every living being in an invisible web of energy and intention. But what happens when something enters this galaxy that exists outside the Force entirely? Something that is neither alive nor dead, neither light nor dark, but simply eternal. The Imperial Star Destroyer. Devastator hung in the silence of deep space, far from any recognized star system. Its mission patrolled the outer rim for rebel activity. What it found instead would shatter every assumption the Empire held about the nature of existence itself. The hyperspace anomaly appeared without warning. No sensor detected it. No astromech droid calculated its trajectory. One moment, the void was empty. The next, reality tore. It wasn't like a ship emerging from light speed. No blue tunnel, no distortion of star lines. This was something fundamentally wrong. Space itself seemed to bleed, a crimson wound opening in the darkness between stars. The breach pulsed with energy that made the Devastator's instruments scream in protest, readings spiking into impossible ranges before equipment simply failed. Through that wound stepped a man in red. He fell through the vacuum of space as casually as one might step off a curb. No environmental suit, no ship, no visible means of propulsion or survival. Just a tall figure in a crimson duster coat and wide-brimmed hat, wire-frame orange sunglasses catching the distant starlight. Behind him, the rift sealed with a sound like reality sighing in relief. The figure didn't suffocate, didn't freeze, didn't explode from decompression. He simply smiled. On the bridge of the Devastator, Admiral Constantine stared at the view screen in disbelief. What in the Emperor's name? "Sir, the entity is approaching our position," reported the sensor officer, voice trembling. "No life signs detected, no technology signatures. Scanners read it as nothing. Dead space." "Dead space doesn't walk," Constantine snapped. "Get me a visual enhancement." The image zoomed and the bridge crew saw him clearly now. Pale skin, dark hair, that unsettling smile, and eyes. Even through the orange lenses, they could see eyes that gleamed with something ancient and hungry. "Alert Lord Vader," Constantine ordered. "Deploy security teams to Hangar Bay 7. Whatever that thing is, it's about to make contact with our hull." The figure, Alucard, though no one in this galaxy yet knew his name, touched down on the Star Destroyer's hull with impossible grace. His boots found purchase on the angled surface as if gravity were a polite suggestion rather than a law. He walked along the exterior, examining the massive vessel with the curiosity of a tourist appreciating alien architecture. "Fascinating," he murmured to himself, voice carrying through the vacuum in defiance of physics. "Not quite the architecture I'm accustomed to, and this energy." He tilted his head, sensing something pervasive throughout this place. Not magic, something else entirely. How delicious. He approached an exterior airlock, studied it for a moment, then simply phased through the reinforced Durasteel door as if it were mist. Klaxons immediately began wailing throughout the ship. Inside the corridor, Alucard materialized fully, shadows peeling away from his form like living things reluctant to release their master. He adjusted his hat, straightened his coat, and took his first breath of recycled Imperial air. "Now then," he said, grin widening to reveal elongated canines. "Let's see what sort of monsters inhabit this particular hell." The first squad of stormtroopers rounded the corner 30 seconds later, blaster rifles raised. "Halt! Identify yourself!" Alucard's response was laughter, deep, rich, and utterly delighted. "Oh, how wonderful. They even have their own little toy soldiers." He spread his arms wide in welcome. "Please, by all means, shoot me." The squad leader hesitated only a moment before giving the order. "Fire!" 20 blaster bolts lanced through the corridor, crimson energy converging on the figure in red. Every shot found its mark. Alucard's body jerked with impacts, holes blown through his chest, head, and limbs. He staggered backward, coat smoking from the superheated plasma. Then he straightened, wounds closing with wet, organic sounds that made the stormtroopers' training falter. "My turn," Alucard whispered. If you want to see more characters enter the Star Wars galaxy, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character you'd want to see in the comments below. May the Force be with you. The shadows exploded outward. The corridor became an abattoir. Shadows didn't just spread, they erupted like living darkness given hunger and malice. Tendrils thick as a man's torso lashed out with serpentine speed, wrapping around stormtroopers before they could process what they were seeing. Plastoid armor, designed to disperse blaster energy and deflect shrapnel, might as well have been paper. The first trooper was lifted off his feet, shadow coiling around his chest. The armor crumpled inward with a sickening crunch. His scream cut off as the tendrils squeezed, and then he was simply gone, dragged into the writhing mass of darkness that billowed from Alucard's form like smoke from a funeral pyre. "Contact! Contact!" The squad leader's voice cracked over the comlink. "We need backup at section." A shadow pierced through his helmet's visor. When it withdrew, the trooper collapsed, empty armor clattering against the deck. The remaining stormtroopers did what their training demanded. They fought. Blaster bolts filled the corridor with strobing red light, each shot precisely aimed, textbook Imperial doctrine. Every bolt struck Alucard. His body jerked and twisted with impacts, holes appearing in his chest, his throat, his skull. He laughed through a ruined jaw. "Yes, more. Show me what passes for warfare in this realm." Alucard's voice emanated from everywhere and nowhere, even as his physical form regenerated faster than they could destroy it. Flesh knitted together, bones reformed, clothing mended itself as if time were running backward. A trooper tried to retreat, backing toward a blast door. Shadow swept his legs out from under him. Before he hit the ground, another tendril caught him, hoisting him upward. Alucard appeared directly before the suspended soldier, moving with speed that left afterimages. "Tell me," Alucard said conversationally, pulling the helmet free with casual strength that bent durasteel. The trooper's face was young, barely out of the academy. "What manner of creature commands you? What god or devil do you serve?" The Empire," the trooper gasped. "Lord Vader, he'll destroy you." Vader, Alucard tasted the name. How delightfully ominous. He dropped the trooper, who scrambled away on hands and knees. "Run along, then. Tell this Vader that someone wishes to meet him, someone who won't die quite so easily as whatever rebels or Jedi he's grown accustomed to slaughtering." The trooper ran. The others weren't so fortunate. By the time reinforcements arrived, 3 full squads, plus 2 Imperial officers wielding stun batons. The corridor was painted in patterns that would require a complete section refit. 17 stormtroopers lay dead or dying. The air tasted of ozone and copper, and standing in the center of it all, coat billowing in a wind that shouldn't exist in the recycled atmosphere, was Alucard. Not a scratch on him, not even breathing hard. Ah, more guests. He drew a massive pistol from within his coat, the Kasul, though its design was utterly foreign to this galaxy. The weapon was absurdly oversized, silver with gold inlay, Baroque scrollwork etched along the barrel. "I do hope you'll provide better sport than the first batch." The lead officer, a lieutenant with more courage than sense, activated his stun baton. "You will surrender, intruder, or—" The Kasul roared. The sound was different from a blaster, deeper, more visceral. The 13mm explosive round caught the lieutenant's center mass and detonated. The blast threw his body backward in pieces. "Or?" Alucard inquired pleasantly. Blaster fire erupted anew. This time, the stormtroopers tried different tactics, suppressing fire while others flanked. Thermal detonators were primed. One trooper even attempted to call in a turbo laser strike on their own position. None of it mattered. Alucard moved through the storm of energy bolts like a dancer through rain, letting some shots pass through his intangible form, tanking others with regeneration so rapid it seemed like the wounds never existed. His shadows claimed trooper after trooper, dragging them into darkness that screamed with voices from beyond death. When the ammunition ran dry and the last trooper fell, Alucard stood alone in the ruined corridor. He holstered the Kazul, straightened his hat, and began walking deeper into the ship. Behind him, emergency bulkheads sealed automatically, trying to contain the breach. Ahead, in the meditation chamber deep within the Devastator's heart, Darth Vader's eyes snapped open behind his mask. He had felt something, a void where life should be, an absence that screamed louder than any presence. The Dark Lord of the Sith rose from his meditation pod. For the first time in years, he felt something almost forgotten: anticipation. Darth Vader strode through the corridors of the Devastator with purpose that made crewmen press themselves against walls to avoid his path. The respirator that sustained his ravaged body hissed with each mechanical breath, a rhythm that had become synonymous with death throughout the galaxy. But now that rhythm quickened almost imperceptibly. Behind him, a full company of stormtroopers struggled to keep pace, their armor clacking in double time. Ahead, the ship's internal sensors painted a picture of systematic carnage. 17 dead in the first encounter, 23 in the second. Now reports were coming in from Deck 7, an entire security checkpoint gone silent. "Lord Vader," Captain Pierce transmitted through his comlink, voice tight with fear. "The intruder is moving toward the detention level. We've sealed all blast doors in sections 4 through 9, but it's passing through them. Sir, our sensors still register nothing. No heat signature, no life signs, no mass displacement. It's as if he doesn't exist." "He exists," Vader replied, his deep voice resonating through the comlink. "I sense him." That was the disturbing part. Vader could sense something, but it defied every principle he'd learned in decades of wielding the Force. It wasn't a presence. It was an absence. A void shaped like a man, moving through his ship like a cancer through healthy tissue. The Force flowed around this entity the way water flowed around a stone, neither touching nor being touched. It simply was not there. Impossible. Vader had faced Jedi Masters who could shield their presence. He had hunted Force sensitives who tried to hide in the cosmic background noise of the galaxy. He had even encountered creatures naturally resistant to Force detection. This was different. This was a hole in reality itself. "All units converge on detention level," Vader commanded. "Seal every exit. I want heavy weapons positioned at every junction. Nothing leaves that section alive." "Yes, Lord Vader." The Dark Lord rounded a corner and stopped. The blast door ahead was sealed, but through its small viewport window, he could see the corridor beyond. Bodies, scorch marks, and something else. Shadows that moved independent of any light source, writhing across walls like living things. Vader raised his hand. The Force surged through him, and the blast door groaned in protest before the locking mechanism shattered. The heavy durasteel panel slid open with a hydraulic hiss. The shadows retreated at his approach, pulling back like a tide before a storm. "Fascinating," came a voice from deeper within. "I wondered when something interesting would arrive." Vader stepped through, lightsaber hilt in hand but not yet ignited. His breathing filled the corridor, in, out, each breath a promise of violence. Around the next corner, leaning casually against a wall between two dead stormtroopers, stood a man in red. Tall, pale, with an unsettling smile that revealed fangs no human should possess. Orange-tinted glasses reflected the emergency lighting, hiding eyes that nevertheless seemed to stare directly into Vader's soul. "You must be Vader," Alucard said conversationally. "Your reputation precedes you, even across dimensional boundaries. Dark Lord of the Sith, the Emperor's fist, the Jedi killer." He tilted his head. "Tell me, do the titles help you sleep at night, or do you even sleep anymore in that suit?" Vader's mechanical hand clenched. "You have killed Imperial personnel, damaged Imperial property. For these crimes, there is only one sentence. Death?" Alucard's grin widened. "Oh, I do hope so. I've been dying for centuries. It never quite takes." The lightsaber ignited with its characteristic snap hiss, crimson blade casting red light across red coat. Vader raised his other hand and the Force coiled around Alucard's throat, an invisible grip that had crushed windpipes across 1,000 worlds. Alucard felt the pressure, acknowledged it, then laughed. "Is that it?" His voice was utterly unaffected, speaking as easily as if nothing held him. "I was told you were powerful. This feels like a child's grip." Vader squeezed, the force pressure that should have collapsed a man's trachea, that should have made blood vessels burst and vertebrae crack, intensified. Vader had once killed a Jedi Master with this technique, had watched the life leave his eyes as the Force crushed every vital organ simultaneously. Alucard continued smiling. "Impossible," Vader breathed. "No," Alucard replied, shadows beginning to pool around his feet. "Just different. Your Force is quaint, energy manipulating matter, life connecting to life. But I'm afraid I don't qualify as life anymore, Lord Vader. I'm something much older, much hungrier." He took a step forward, and Vader felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Uncertainty. "Now then," Alucard said, producing his pistol. "Shall we see which is stronger, your ancient power or my eternal curse?" Vader released the Force choke, not out of mercy, but because maintaining it was pointless. The entity before him stood unaffected, as if the dark side itself couldn't find purchase on whatever this thing was. "You are not of this galaxy," Vader stated, lightsaber humming between them. "How perceptive." Alucard holstered the Kasul with theatrical slowness. "I was elsewhere, hunting prey far less interesting than you. Then reality decided to shuffle the deck, and I found myself here, among the stars, among new monsters." His grin turned predatory. "I must say, I'm not disappointed." Behind Vader, stormtroopers filed into the corridor, weapons trained on Alucard. 50 soldiers, all with clear lines of fire. Their training overrode their fear, barely. Vader raised a hand, staying their fire. This required a different approach. He reached deeper into the Force, past the surface techniques of telekinesis and mental domination. He touched the fundamental energy that connected all living things, seeking the threads of fate and future that bound this intruder to reality. Nothing. Where Alucard stood, the Force simply ended. Not blocked, not resisted, just absent, as if someone had cut a hole in the fabric of the universe, and he was the void left behind. "Looking for something?" Alucard asked, tapping his temple. "I've had telepaths poke around my consciousness before. Some were quite skilled. They all went mad, eventually. The things I've seen, the years I've lived, the souls I've consumed. It's rather toxic to most minds." Vader shifted his stance, lightsaber angled in Jem So's opening form. If the Force could not touch this creature, then physical combat would suffice. He had not survived Order 66, the Jedi Purge, and countless battles by relying solely on mystical power. "You assume you can harm me with that laser sword," Alucard observed. "An interesting gambit." Shall we test the theory? Vader moved. Despite his cybernetic limbs and life support systems, the Dark Lord could still strike with devastating speed when the Force augmented his movements. He closed the distance in a heartbeat, crimson blade arcing toward Alucard's throat in a strike that had beheaded Jedi Masters. The lightsaber passed through Alucard's neck, through shadows. Where flesh should have been, only darkness remained. Alucard's head tilted at an impossible angle, separating from his body entirely. But there was no blood, no cauterized wound, just writhing shadow holding the severed pieces together like obscene puppet strings. "My turn," Alucard said from his displaced head. His body moved independently, shadows erupting from the stump of his neck in a lance of pure darkness. Vader brought his lightsaber around in a defensive arc, the blade cleaving through shadow, and for a moment it worked. The lightsaber's plasma blade burned the darkness away, but more simply took its place. Vader was forced back, his boots scraping against the deck as tentacles of living night pressed his defense. Behind him, stormtroopers opened fire, bolts lancing past their lord to strike Alucard's reforming body. Each hit was a temporary inconvenience. Holes appeared and closed. Limbs were severed and regrew. When three troopers coordinated a crossfire that should have vaporized Alucard's torso entirely, he simply dispersed, body becoming mist and shadow that reformed 10 meters down the corridor. "Disappointing," Alucard said, now whole again, head reattached without seam or scar. "I expected more from the great Darth Vader. Is this the power that toppled the Jedi Order? Telekinesis that doesn't work and a glowing sword?" Vader's response was immediate and brutal. He thrust out both hands and the corridor itself became a weapon. The Force gripped deck plating, wall panels, ceiling supports, anything not bolted down and much that was. Debris transformed into projectiles, all hurtling toward Alucard with bone-crushing force. A section of bulkhead the size of a speeder bike slammed into Alucard, followed by torn metal panels, a crushed maintenance droid, and half a blast door. The impacts drove him backward, pinning him against the far wall in a makeshift tomb of wreckage. For 3 seconds, silence. Then laughter echoed from within the debris pile. "Better! Much better!" Metal shrieked as Alucard pushed through it, not moving around the obstacles, but simply phasing through solid matter. He emerged unscathed, dusting off his coat as if he'd merely walked through a cobweb. "You're starting to entertain me, Lord Vader, but let me show you what true immortality looks like." He drew both pistols, the Kasul and its twin, the Jackal. The weapons were grotesque parodies of elegance, oversized and brutal. "These were made to kill things that shouldn't exist," Alucard explained. "Monsters, vampires, gods. Let's see how well they work on Sith Lords." Both guns roared. The Jackal's 13mm explosive round struck Vader's lightsaber mid-deflection. The blade caught the projectile but couldn't fully stop its momentum. The round detonated against the plasma field in a flash of superheated shrapnel. Vader twisted, using the Force to redirect the blast wave, but the Kasul's round was already screaming toward his chest. His free hand shot up. The Force caught the bullet mid-flight, holding it suspended inches from his armor. The round spun in place, warhead primed but frozen. "Impressive," Alucard conceded, "but can you stop them all?" He fired again and again, both pistols roaring in alternating rhythm, each shot precise and devastating. Vader moved through the storm of bullets with mechanical precision, lightsaber deflecting what he couldn't stop with the Force. Redirecting explosive rounds into walls and ceiling, the corridor became a war zone. Stormtroopers scattered, seeking cover as shrapnel ricocheted off walls. One trooper wasn't fast enough. A deflected round caught him in the shoulder, and the explosion painted the wall behind him crimson. Vader advanced through the gunfire, each step deliberate. His lightsaber wove a defensive pattern, the Force extending his awareness to track trajectory before trigger pull. But Alucard wasn't fighting like a soldier. He was fighting like someone who'd faced impossible odds for centuries and learned that death was merely an intermission. When the Jackal's slide locked back empty, Alucard didn't reload. He simply moved. His speed defied physics, not the Force-augmented velocity Vader employed, but something else entirely. One moment he stood 15 meters away. The next he was inside Vader's guard, coat billowing like wings of shadow. A clawed hand struck Vader's chest plate with superhuman force. The reinforced armor held, but the impact drove Vader backward, boots leaving grooves in the deck plating. Before he could recover, Alucard pressed the attack, a flurry of strikes that forced Vader into pure defensive form 5, lightsaber moving in tight arcs to intercept blows that could shatter durasteel. "You're fast," Alucard said conversationally, even as his hand swept toward Vader's helmet. "But you're trapped in that suit, aren't you? I can hear it. The respirator, the servos, the constant mechanical struggle to keep what's left of you alive." Vader said nothing. His blade found its mark, driving through Alucard's chest in a thrust that should have ended any living being. The lightsaber's plasma blade cauterized as it cut, burning through flesh and bone. Alucard looked down at the blade protruding from his sternum. "That tickles." He grabbed the lightsaber with his bare hand. The plasma should have severed his fingers instantly. Instead, his grip held, regeneration fighting against continuous damage in an impossible stalemate. Smoke rose from his palm as flesh burned and regrew in rapid cycles. "Your weapon burns hot," Alucard said, pulling himself forward along the blade, impaling himself further. "But I've burned before. I've been staked, beheaded, blessed, cursed, shot with silver, drowned in holy water, and torn apart by blessed bayonets." He was now face to face with Vader, close enough that his breath, cold, impossibly cold, fogged the Dark Lord's mask lenses. "I always come back." Vader released the lightsaber and thrust both hands forward. The Force erupted in a concussive wave that would have pulverized a durasteel wall. At point-blank range, directed by one of the most powerful Force users alive, the telekinetic blast struck Alucard like the fist of an angry god. The vampire flew backward through 3 sealed blast doors, each one crumpling like aluminum foil. He crashed through a support beam, through a weapons locker, and finally into the far wall of the hangar bay, embedding 3 feet deep into solid metal. Vader called his lightsaber back to his hand with the Force. Around him, stormtroopers emerged from cover, reforming ranks with admirable discipline despite witnessing something that shattered their understanding of mortality. "Maintain perimeter," Vader commanded. "Heavy weapons. Target that wall." 4 troopers deployed rotary blaster cannons, the kind typically mounted on AT-ST walkers. They opened fire in synchronized bursts, pouring thousands of bolts into the hangar wall where Alucard had impacted. Metal superheated and melted under the sustained barrage. For 15 seconds, the cannons roared. When they ceased fire, the wall was a glowing, half-molten ruin, and from within that ruin, laughter echoed. The metal began to bulge outward, not from physical pressure, but from shadows that seeped through microscopic cracks, expanding like infection through a wound. The darkness spread across the hangar bay's floor, walls, and ceiling, moving independent of any light source, defying every natural law. "You're making this fun," Alucard's voice emanated from everywhere at once. "Most opponents die after the first few exchanges. But you keep trying. You keep fighting. Good." The shadows coalesced, and Alucard stepped out of the darkness as casually as one might exit a room. His coat was shredded, his body still regenerating from the rotary cannon barrage, ribs visible through torn flesh, one eye socket empty and reforming. He looked delighted. "Tell me, Lord Vader, how many men have you killed? Hundreds? Thousands?" Alucard's ruined face grinned with half a jaw. "I've killed millions, armies, civilizations. And every single soul I've taken lives within me, screaming, clawing, begging for release." The shadows around him began to writhe, and within their depths, faces appeared, twisted, agonized faces of the damned. "Would you like to meet them?" Vader released the electrical assault. The power draw was unsustainable. Another 10 seconds and he would have burned out the Devastator's primary reactor. Smoke rose from Alucard's charred form, flesh regenerating slower now, struggling against the catastrophic damage, but regenerating nonetheless. "You're powerful," Alucard admitted, voice hoarse. "More powerful than I anticipated. In my world, only a handful could harm me like that." His skin knitted back together, muscles reforming beneath. "But power alone doesn't win wars, Lord Vader. I learned that when I was still mortal, when I was Vlad Dracula, voivode of Wallachia." Vader's respirator hissed steadily. "You were human once. Centuries ago." Alucard's coat materialized around him anew, shadows weaving fabric from nothing. "I was a man, a warrior, a prince who fought against the Ottoman Empire with every brutal method at my disposal. They called me the Impaler for good reason." His smile held no warmth. "I died defending my homeland, and in death I became something far worse than any Turkish invader." "A monster," Vader stated. "Yes," Alucard's eyes gleamed behind his orange glasses. "The question is, what does that make you?" Vader's grip tightened on his lightsaber. Around them, the hangar bay was devastated. Fires burned across half the deck. Destroyed TIE fighters lay in twisted wreckage. Emergency klaxons wailed, and still the two beings faced each other, neither willing to yield. "This accomplishes nothing," Vader said finally. "You cannot be killed. I cannot be defeated. We are at an impasse." "Are we?" Alucard tilted his head. "I don't think you believe that. I think you're calculating, planning, trying to find the one weakness in my defenses." He spread his arms wide. So here's my offer. One direct hit. Full power. Your strongest technique. Whatever Sith sorcery or Force ability you've been holding in reserve. Use it. See if you can actually destroy me." It was a trap. It had to be. No opponent offered such advantage without ulterior motive. But Vader was running out of options. Conventional warfare was useless. Physical combat achieved nothing permanent. This entity regenerated from everything. Unless he could damage Alucard faster than he could heal. Vader deactivated his lightsaber and raised both hands. The Force gathered around him, pulled from every living thing aboard the Devastator. Crewmen thousands of meters away suddenly felt exhausted without knowing why. Emergency power flickered as Vader drew upon the ship's own electromagnetic field. The dark side responded to his call, eager, hungry, vast. This was the technique that had killed Jedi Master Koth on Cato Neimoidia. The concentrated force crush that could compress a body into a sphere no larger than a fist. Vader unleashed it. The invisible pressure slammed into Alucard from every direction simultaneously. The vampire's body compacted, bones snapping audibly, organs rupturing, flesh compressing. In 3 seconds, Alucard was reduced to a crushed, mangled mass barely recognizable as humanoid. Vader held the technique for 10 seconds, 20, 30, pouring more power into the crush, compacting tighter, breaking down molecular bonds through sheer telekinetic pressure. when he finally released it, exhausted, Alucard was little more than a pulverized heap. Vader allowed himself one mechanical breath of satisfaction. Then the heap laughed. "Magnificent," came Alucard's voice, impossibly clear despite having no functional lungs. "I haven't been crushed like that since 1944, when a SR-71 Blackbird's experimental payload detonated on me. That priest thought he could kill me with military ordnance." The crushed mass began expanding. Bones snapped back into place with wet cracks. Flesh reformed around reconstructed organs. Within 30 seconds, Alucard stood whole, not even breathing hard. "My turn," he said. Before Vader could react, Alucard closed the distance. Not with superhuman speed this time, but with something worse. He simply ceased to exist in one location and existed in another, bypassing the space between entirely. His hand caught Vader's throat, not a physical grip, but something else. Something that touched not flesh, but the Force connection itself. Vader felt his connection to the dark side waver. "What are you?" His vocoder distorted as the grip tightened. "Your suit keeps you alive through machine and mysticism," Alucard observed clinically. "But there's still a man underneath. A broken, burned, dying man clinging to existence through rage and technology." His eyes found Vader's behind the mask. "I can taste it. The weakness, the fear, the pain you carry every second of every day." Vader's hand shot up, catching Alucard's wrist. For a moment, they were locked together, the Dark Lord's cybernetic strength against the vampire's supernatural grip. "You fear death," Alucard continued. "You've feared it since Mustafar. Since you woke in this suit and realized you'd traded your humanity for power." His grip tightened. "But I've died 3 million times. Death is an old friend. Let me introduce you." The shadows surged inward, wrapping around Vader's armor, seeping into every joint and crevice. The Dark Lord called upon the Force, pushing back, but Alucard's grip on his throat disrupted his concentration. For the first time since Mustafar, Vader felt truly helpless, and in that moment of helplessness, something stirred in the back of his mind. A memory, a voice. Anakin. The voice was a ghost from a life Vader had buried. Padme's voice, speaking his true name, the name he'd abandoned, the man he'd killed to become what he was now. And in that microsecond of hesitation, that flicker of the man he'd been, Alucard sensed it. Ah. The vampire's grip loosened slightly, curiosity replacing killing intent. "There's someone else in there, someone you've tried very hard to forget." His head tilted, studying Vader with newfound interest. "You're not just a monster by choice. You're a man who became a monster. How fascinating." Vader's rage exploded. The Force detonated outward in a sphere of pure dark side energy, the kind of unfocused burst that came from emotion rather than technique. It threw Alucard across the hangar bay, but more importantly, it shattered the shadow tendrils constricting Vader's armor. "You know nothing of what I am," Vader snarled, his vocoder straining to contain the fury in his voice. His lightsaber ignited with a violent snap hiss. "You are an abomination, an anomaly. I am the Empire's will made manifest." Alucard rose from where he'd landed, dusting off his coat. "Such anger, such pain. You know, I've met many who traded their humanity for power. Most regretted it eventually." His smile was almost sympathetic. "Do you regret it, Vader? Late at night when you're alone in your meditation chamber, do you wonder if she would have loved what you've become?" Vader moved with pure hate-fueled speed. His blade came down in an overhead strike that would have cleaved a landspeeder in half. Alucard sidestepped casually, but Vader had anticipated it. The Force yanked Alucard's foot, throwing off his balance just enough for the lightsaber's return stroke to connect. The blade carved through Alucard's side, bisecting him from shoulder to hip. The two halves of the vampire fell apart, landing wetly on the deck. For 2 seconds, they lay still. Then both halves began laughing. "Better!" Both mouths spoke in unison. "You're fighting with emotion now. With hate. That's so much more interesting than cold technique." The halves dissolved into shadow and reformed 10 meters away, Alucard whole once more. But something had changed. The vampire's expression was no longer merely amused. There was respect there now. Recognition. "You truly are darkness incarnate," Alucard said. "Not the pretend darkness of power-hungry fools, but genuine, soul-deep corruption born from unimaginable loss." He drew both pistols again. "Perhaps you're the most dangerous opponent I've faced in decades." "Then you will die here," Vader replied, though both knew the words rang hollow. "Will I?" Alucard's grin returned. "Or will you? Let's find out." What followed was carnage on a scale the Devastator had never witnessed. Vader abandoned all restraint, pulling upon the dark side with reckless fury. Walls tore free to become projectiles. The hangar bay's atmosphere itself became a weapon, compressed into battering rams of air pressure. He seized fuel lines and ignited them, turning half the bay into an inferno. Alucard met it all with centuries of combat experience. He flowed through impossible spaces, body becoming shadow when advantageous, solid when striking back. His pistols roared continuously. He'd stopped needing to reload, somehow manifesting ammunition from the same dark place his shadows emerged from. Each shot forced Vader to deflect or dodge, each deflection an opening for shadow tendrils to strike. They fought through the hangar bay, into the connecting corridors, up through 3 decks. Every space they passed became a war zone. Crewmen evacuated entire sections just to avoid the collateral damage. And throughout it all, Vader felt something he hadn't experienced in years. He was being pushed. Not defeated, the stalemate held, but challenged in ways the rebellion never could. Every technique he employed, Alucard adapted to. Every force, ability he demonstrated, the vampire found a counter for. It was like fighting a reflection that learned from every exchange. They crashed through into a cargo bay, and Vader made a decision. If physical destruction was impossible, perhaps containment would suffice. He raised both hands, and the Force obeyed on a massive scale. Every cargo container in the bay, hundreds of tons of durasteel and supplies, lifted into the air simultaneously. Then, with a gesture, Vader brought them all crashing down on Alucard's position. The impact shook the entire ship. Vader didn't wait. He sealed the cargo bay with the Force, warping the blast doors into an impenetrable seal. Then he began venting atmosphere from the compartment, creating a vacuum that would preserve the tomb indefinitely. For 30 seconds, silence. Then, from within the sealed bay came a sound that made Vader's blood, what little organic blood remained, run cold. Not laughter this time. Singing. A haunting melody in a language Vader didn't recognize. Sung by not one voice, but thousands, all the souls Alucard carried, all singing in unison. The sound shouldn't have been audible through vacuum and sealed doors, but it was. It resonated through the Force itself, a discordant note in the cosmic symphony. The sealed blast door began to bleed shadows. "Oh no," Vader said quietly. The door exploded outward, not from physical force, but from shadow density so concentrated it simply displaced matter. And through the opening came Alucard, but changed. His coat billowed despite the vacuum. His eyes glowed crimson behind shattered glasses. and around him the shadows had solidified into forms, skeletal warriors in ancient armor, dogs made of darkness with too many eyes, and things that defied description. "You wanted to see my full power," Alucard said, voice echoing with multitudes. "Let me show you Control Alt Restriction System Level 2 release." The army of the damned surged forward. Vader had faced armies before. On Geonosis, he'd waded through battle droids by the hundreds. On Kashyyyk, he'd slaughtered Wookiee warriors defending their homeworld. He was intimately familiar with combat against overwhelming numbers. But those were living enemies. These were something else entirely. The Shadow Army moved with unified purpose, each entity a fragment of Alucard's will given form. Skeletal soldiers wielding ethereal weapons charged in disciplined ranks. The hounds, nightmare creatures with jaws that could swallow a man whole, loped forward on legs that bent in too many directions. Vader's lightsaber became a crimson blur. He cut through the first wave, plasma blades severing shadow forms that screamed and dissolved. But for every one he destroyed, 3 more pressed forward. They came from every angle, above, below, through walls as if solid matter were merely a suggestion. A skeletal warrior's sword struck Vader's shoulder, pauldron, and impossibly it bit. The shadow weapon cut through durasteel as easily as his lightsaber cut through flesh. Vader spun, bisecting the creature, then immediately pivoted to block another strike from behind. The Force was his shield and weapon both. He created barriers of telekinetic energy that held back the tide momentarily. He pulled sections of ceiling down to crush clusters of shadow beasts. He even attempted to drain the dark energy sustaining them, pulling at the shadows the way he might drain life from a living being. But they kept coming. "You're wondering why the Force won't work," Alucard's voice echoed from everywhere. The vampire himself stood in the center of his army, untouched, watching. "It's because they're already dead. They died decades ago, centuries ago, in wars you've never heard of. The Force connects the living, but I connect the dead." A shadow hound lunged at Vader's throat. He caught it with the Force mid-leap and crushed it, but another struck from his blind side, jaws clamping onto his left arm. Teeth that shouldn't exist pierced the armor's joint seals. Warning indicators flashed across Vader's HUD as the limb servos were compromised. Vader channeled Force lightning through his body, a technique that usually caused him agony due to his cybernetics. But pain was irrelevant now. The electrical discharge vaporized the hound and stunned the others, long enough for him to create distance. But his left arm hung useless, hydraulics severed. "You're slowing," Alucard observed. "That suit is your weakness. It sustains you, yes, but it also limits you. Every joint is a vulnerability, every seal a potential failure point." He gestured, and his army paused. "I wonder what happens if I break enough of it. Will the great Darth Vader suffocate? Will he burn again, like he did on Mustafar?" The name of that world struck deeper than any physical blow. Vader's rage crystallized into something cold and absolute. He reached deeper into the dark side than he had in years, past anger into the realm of pure hate. The cargo bay's temperature dropped as the Force itself seemed to recoil from the concentration of malice. When Vader spoke, his voice carried the weight of countless deaths. "You think you understand suffering because you cannot die. But immortality is mercy compared to living when everything you loved has been destroyed by your own hand." He raised his functional arm and the entire Star Destroyer shuddered. Vader wasn't targeting Alucard anymore. He was targeting the ship itself, every structural support, every bulkhead, every system. All became weapons. The Devastator began tearing itself apart from within, guided by the Dark Lord's will. "If I cannot destroy you," Vader declared, Then I will bury you in the void between stars and collapse this entire vessel on top of you." Alucard's eyes widened slightly. "You'd kill your own crew? They are acceptable losses." Vader's tone held no hesitation. "I am the Empire. The crew serves the Empire. Therefore, they serve me. Their lives are mine to spend." For the first time, yeah. Alucard's expression shifted from amusement to something else. Not fear, but perhaps disappointment. "I see," he said quietly. The Shadow Army dissolved, pulled back into his form. "You've embraced monstrosity so completely that you've forgotten what you were fighting for in the first place." He began walking toward Vader, slowly, deliberately. "When I became a vampire, I did it to defend my homeland, to be strong enough that no invader could threaten what I loved. But you..." He stopped 5 meters away. "You destroyed everything you loved, and now you pretend the destruction was necessary, that it made you strong." Alucard's voice carried something unexpected, pity. "You're not a monster, Vader. Monsters at least have purpose. You're just broken." The words cut through Vader's armor more effectively than any shadow blade buys, because somewhere buried under decades of hate and the ruins of Anakin Skywalker, a fragment of the man he'd been recognized the truth in them. The structural collapse Vader had initiated continued. Walls buckled, supports failed. Alarms screamed throughout the ship as catastrophic hull breaches opened to space. "Impressive tantrum," Alucard said, shadows beginning to gather around him protectively, "but ultimately futile. I'll survive this. Will you?" Vader didn't answer. Couldn't answer. Because for the first time since becoming the Emperor's enforcer, he wasn't certain. The cargo bay's ceiling gave way. Atmosphere vented in an explosive rush, and as Vader felt his suit's systems struggle against the vacuum as he sensed crew members throughout the ship dying from his own actions, a single thought crystallized in his mind. "Is this what I've become?" The question terrified him more than Alucard ever could. The Devastator was dying. Emergency bulkheads slammed shut across a dozen sections, but Vader's assault on the ship's structural integrity had been too thorough. Atmosphere vented from 3 major breaches. Power fluctuated as conduits severed. The hyperspace engines, damaged by the initial dimensional rift that brought Alucard, began failing catastrophically. In the cargo bay exposed to vacuum, 2 beings faced each other amid the devastation. Vader's suit, designed to sustain him even in the void of space, struggled against multiple system failures. His ruined left arm sparked, his respirator labored. Warning indicators cascaded across his vision. Around him, debris floated in zero gravity, testament to the destruction he'd wrought. Alucard stood untouched, shadows wrapping him in a cocoon that ignored physics and vacuum alike. He regarded Vader with an expression that held no mockery, no amusement, just ancient, weary recognition. "We're the same, you and I," Alucard said, voice carrying impossibly through airless space. "Men who gave up everything to become weapons. The difference is, I remember why I chose this path. You've forgotten." Vader's response came slowly, each word dragged from somewhere dark and painful. "I remember everything. That is my curse." "Then why do you serve?" Alucard gestured to the dying ship around them. "This empire. This emperor. What do they offer you besides chains dressed as purpose?" "Power," Vader replied automatically, but the word felt hollow even to him. "No," Alucard shook his head. "Power is what I have. What you have is servitude. You kneel to a master, follow orders, destroy what you're told to destroy." His eyes glowed crimson. "I spent centuries as a slave to my bloodlust. It took someone stronger than me to give me purpose again, someone I chose to serve. But you? He took a step closer. You serve because you're afraid of what happens if you stop. The words detonated something in Vader's chest. Rage surged, but beneath it, something else. Something that felt dangerously like truth. You know nothing of my loyalty to the Emperor, Vader said, but his voice had lost its conviction. Don't I? Alucard smiled sadly. I've consumed thousands of souls, Vader. I've absorbed their memories, their fears, their regrets. And standing here before you, I sense all the same things. The self-hatred, the guilt, the desperate hope that if you commit to this darkness completely enough, eventually it will stop hurting. He paused. It never does. Vader raised his functional hand, lightsaber igniting. But the gesture was weaker now. The fight had drained him, not physically, but in some deeper way. I should destroy you, Vader said. You can't, Alucard replied simply. We've established that. Just as I cannot truly kill you without that suit failing completely, and I find I don't have the stomach for executing a man trapped in his own mechanical coffin. He turned, looking out through the massive hull breach at the stars beyond. This fight accomplished nothing except revealing what we both already knew. And what is that? That immortality and power are prisons of their own making. Alucard glanced back. I'm going to leave now. Find my way back to where I belong, or perhaps find something new in this strange galaxy. You'll report to your Emperor that you encountered an anomaly that escaped. He'll be displeased, but you'll survive his displeasure. You always do. Vader lowered his lightsaber, not in surrender, but in acknowledgement. If we meet again. We won't, Alucard interrupted. This galaxy is vast, and honestly, I don't think either of us wants a rematch. We learned what we needed to learn from each other. Which is? Alucard's smile returned, but gentler this time. That being a monster is a choice you make every day, and someday you might choose differently. Before Vader could respond, shadows enveloped Alucard completely. The darkness compressed into a single point, then vanished, leaving behind only the faintest ripple in the Force, like a stone thrown into a pond. He was gone. Vader stood alone in the ruined cargo bay, surrounded by destruction he'd caused in a ship crippled by his rage. Around him, crew members were dying because of his actions. The Emperor would be furious. The ship would require months of repairs. And for the first time in years, Darth Vader felt something he'd thought permanently buried. Doubt, not about his power, not about his abilities, but about whether the man he'd become was truly who he wanted to be. The thought was dangerous, treasonous, the kind of weakness the dark side punished mercilessly. Yet, it persisted. In his meditation chamber hours later, after the Devastator had been stabilized and the survivors accounted for, Vader sat in darkness and considered what Alucard had said about choice, about servitude, about remembering why he'd chosen this path. He'd told himself for years that Anakin Skywalker was dead, that the man who'd loved Padme, who'd dreamed of freeing slaves and protecting the innocent, was nothing but ash scattered on Mustafar's winds. But if that were true, why did Alucard's words sting? "My lord," the intercom crackled, "the Emperor wishes to speak with you." Vader's hand clenched. The moment of reflection ended, buried under duty and fear and the weight of decades of choices that couldn't be unmade. "Connect him," Vader commanded. But as Palpatine's hologram materialized, demanding answers and berating his failure, a small part of Vader, the part that still remembered being Anakin, made a note. The vampire was right. I am afraid. It was a dangerous realization, perhaps the most dangerous of his life. But for the first time since Mustafar, Darth Vader had glimpsed a truth he'd spent years hiding from. that the chains he wore were ones he'd forged himself, and chains, no matter how strong, could be broken. The encounter between Alucard and Darth Vader ended without victor, but with both beings fundamentally changed. Alucard vanished into the vast Star Wars galaxy, his immortal nature allowing him to survive the dimensional crossing while seeking either a way home or a new purpose in this realm of force and lightsabers. Vader returned to his duties, the Emperor's enforcer, once more. But something had shifted. In the vampire who could not die, Vader had confronted a dark mirror of his own existence, immortality purchased through suffering, power gained by surrendering humanity, purpose found only in service to masters who demanded absolute obedience. The Devastator was eventually repaired. The incident was classified at the highest levels, and officially the anomaly was recorded as a failed rebel superweapon that Darth Vader personally neutralized. But in the quiet moments between missions, in the darkness of his meditation chamber, Vader found himself returning to Alucard's final words. Being a monster is a choice you make every day. Perhaps somewhere in the galaxy far, far away, a vampire who had lived for centuries pondered the same thought about a Sith Lord trapped in a suit of his own making. Both were monsters. Both were immortal in their own ways. Both had sacrificed everything for power. But only one had admitted he might still have a choice. Years later, when Vader would face his son on the second Death Star and make his final decision, perhaps a fragment of that realization would resurface. Perhaps Alucard's intervention, brief as it was, planted a seed that would eventually bloom into redemption. Or perhaps it changed nothing, and the encounter was simply what it appeared to be, two immortals meeting briefly, recognizing each other, and walking away.